Alderman, ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you please to stand for the mirror to see your parents, Alderman Duxbury.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much. Before proceeding, I'd like to invite Father Peter Rothman from the February Millstone Catholic Parish to open the proceedings with prayer.
Over this evening, I was noting how the days are drawing in, and unfortunately we'll lose daylight saving at the end of the month. April Fool's Day, the start of the old times, and I reflect a lot on times because I suppose everyone who's reasonably busy finds there's not enough time to do everything. And yet I was thinking of that passage from the Old Testament that said there is a time for everything. I'd qualify that and say there's a time for a lot of things. But we need to look at that one thing we are equally. We all have 24 hours a day, and yet how we use those hours. And so our prayer tonight might be that, Lord, we pray that we've given 24 hours a day, that we would use it to the very best of our ability, and we would see to the things that are important to our family, to our faith, to our community, to the responsibilities that we have, but also to take time out to say thank you for those who have done so much for us, to say sorry for those that we've offended, and to look forward to new challenges with great hope. So may each one of us who are blessed with 24 hours a day use it responsibly and be able to give a good account of ourselves for the responsible use of all that we have. Thank you.
Father Peter. Before proceeding, I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on tonight, and pay our respects to elders past and present, and also remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded audio-visually and will be available on Council's website later this week. Thank you. Declare the meeting open, and note an apology, in fact leave from Alderman Doust. Item 2, confirmation of minutes for the 26th of February, as circulated, be taken as read. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Second is Alderman Thurley. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Nothing to report at item 3. Item 4 is that Council notes the workshops conducted on the 5th and 13th of March and the agenda briefing on the 16th of March. Thanks, Alderman Pearce. Seconded Alderman Cusick. All those in favour? Against? I take it that was a 4, Alderman. Thank you. I declare it unanimous in that case. Thank you. Item 5, declarations of interest of Alderman or close associate.
I declare an interest in 11.5.1.
11.5.1. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Item 6, there are no petitions in the agenda. Are there any from the floor? Thank you. Item 7, public question time. There are no matters on notice. Are there any members of the public who would like to ask a question without notice? Thank you. Item 8 is deputations, and we have Miss Angela King. While you're coming forward, I do need to remind that there's only 3 minutes available under our meeting regulations, and there'll be a tone at 2.5 minutes.
building envelope will impact on 71 London Road. The garage, the second floor deck three, and the roof fascia all significantly protrude, as seen in the northwest elevation drawing. This combination of horizontal and vertical features, protruding the building envelope, rising 90 degrees from ground level up to the roof cap, and seen only from our view on the right, is a disproportionate backdrop to our primary outdoor living space, removing any illusion that the spaces and abilities. Only being primarily evident from here. It is the case where we see the majority of our this last star can be seen in aerial views that were provided in the advertisement, and they're in your agenda. Our lawn where we eat, drink and sunbathe will be boxed in by a high masonry wall with a 6 metre long screen deck. What says trees will reduce the visual impact. There are no trees on this section of boundary, and if there were, we need to remove them. Our trees are deciduous, and for 5 months of the year our block is bare. Performance criteria, the standalone clause relating to loss of energy due to visual impact, cannot be satisfied. The architect's opinion is that the dwelling's large boundary line profile will have an unacceptably large visual impact on our adjoining lot.
Action at item 9. Item 10, reports from outside bodies. First of all, we've got Southern Tasmanian Council's Authority. I can report that the draft quarterly report has been circulated, and I expect that to be cleared and certainly available at the next council meeting. The Copying Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority, Alderman Campbell.
Yes, I move the report be received, and is a gross profit of $464,000 for the half year, which is very encouraging, and the intake is continuing, and it's still fairly buoyant, so we'd be hoping for that to continue for the remainder of this financial year. And the C-cell has been...
Do we have a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman McFarlane. Any questions or discussion? In that case, put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. There's nothing to report for the Tasmanian Water Corporation at this stage. Item 10.2, reports from Council and Special Committees and other representative bodies. Alderman Chong?
I have minutes from the Richmond Advisory Committee, the Community Health and Wellbeing Advisory Committee, and I'd like to just make a quick verbal report on the Local Government Association General Meeting, if I may. There was a general meeting on the 2nd of March. There were 4 items for decision, one of which was a Clarence Council motion that we review the state planning provisions relating to general residential and inner residential, and that was passed unanimously. Other motions that were passed included a review of the national competition policy principles in relation to free camping, support for changes to the Traffic Act to allow councils to install road humps on local roads, and a review of the Roads and Jetties Act, in particular relation to delineation and coordination of state and local road maintenance. Just a couple of other updates. There was a request previously through the Premier's Local Government Council for review of deductibility limits at elections, council elections, on a federal basis. That was rejected. They were not keen on looking at the tax deductibility. There are a number of election workshops going to be held in conjunction with the Electoral Commission and with Australian Local Government Women's Association. I have no doubt Alderman Surley will tell us more about that at some point. Couple of issues that came up for noting, I guess. Interestingly, New South Wales have walked away from the council, the indemnity that they had for councils, with as long as you approve items in coastal areas with the best knowledge that you have at the time. That's now been walked away from, which is interesting. And an upcoming issue, I guess, which we'll all have to look at some point, with the rise of electric vehicles. A lot of the funding for roads comes from the fuel excise. And if we have a lot of vehicles on that road that are not using fuel, interesting question that's being looked at a national level about how we actually are going to get funding from the national bodies for roads in local areas.
Now, my question through you to Alderman Chong. You mentioned that the motion in relation to amendments to the residential properties, can yourself or the General Manager just throw some light on that, what the process may be, and as to whether or not there would be any changes to the to the schemes to enable what I think is a better balance between the developers and those people living in allotments or on existing
If I
sites.
could, perhaps the big housing summit that took place late last week, the government committed to reviewing the codes as part of that process. So we don't know any more than that at this stage. Well, we're just waiting to see how they intend to go about it in terms of process and what sort of outcomes they're looking for. But they have advised us that they are going to undertake that review. Any other questions? Alderman McFarlane.
Would we have an ability to have input into the brief for whatever consultancy happens with that review?
Running through, Mr. Mayor, any review will be undertaken by the State Government Department, and they might circulate the scope of the review to ALGA or councillors for comment, but in terms of preparation of it.
Any other questions? Thank you for those reports. Alderman Chong. Any other reports?
Belrive Community Arts Centre, Annual General Meeting, President's Report and the monthly meeting for 14th of March.
Alderman Hume.
Mr Mayor, the minutes of the Business and Management meeting for February.
The reports. Item 11 is reports from officers. 11.1, that the information in the weekly briefing reports of the 26th of February, the 5th and the 13th of March be noted. Thanks, Alderman Pears. Seconded, Alderman Thurley. Any discussion on the weekly briefing reports? Okay, so the motion is, all those in favour? Carried unanimously. There's nothing to report at 11.2, so I now advise that Council intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. And the first item, 11.3.1, is a development application at 738 Oceana Drive, Tranmere, for 4 multiple dwellings and shared access. Thanks, Alderman Pears. Seconded, Alderman Cusick. Alderman Pears.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, there's one representation, and that had to do with the raising of traffic impacts. And on page 32, under performance criteria P3, I was quite pleased to see that it's got Council's engineers have assessed the access arrangements for the site and are satisfied that the developer will meet all irrelevant Australian standards. So I was pleased with that. I thought there may have been some issue with overshadowing, but
I think the officers have done a very good report on that, so I'm quite happy to move this, Mayor.
I need to say, Mr Mayor, I think it's a suitable residential development for this area.
Well, the motion is for recommending approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.2 is a development application at 89 Carhill Place, Acton Park for a dwelling. Alderman Campbell, seconded Alderman Chong. Would you like to speak to it? Alderman Chong?
For the officer's recommendation.
Any speakers? Put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.3 is a development application at 11 Ormond Street, Belrive, addition to dwelling. Thanks, Alderman Cusick. Second, Alderman Hume. Any speakers? Motion is recommending approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.4 is a development application at 59 Karula Road, Lindisfarne. Alderman Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have circulated a motion and the motion...
Can we have a second, please? Thanks, Alderman Cusick.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The motion is that the application for a DA at 59 Karora Road, Lindisfarne, be refused for the following reasons. The proposal does not satisfy performance criteria 10.4.2 P3, in that the visual impacts caused by the apparent scale, by or proportions of the proposed dwelling will be inappropriate when viewed from 71 Malana Road. And the reasons for Council's decision are listed. And also, Mr Mayor, the proposal is an overdevelopment which will adversely impact on the heritage value of the adjoining property at 71 Malana Road.
James, do I have the same one circulated? There's a point A2 there that you didn't read out in terms of...
Yes, I actually covered that in my comment a moment ago when I said the proposal is an overdevelopment, thanks to Mr Mayor, which will adversely impact upon the heritage value of the adjoining property, and thank you for that. This is an interesting one. I want to say very little other than to say that it's probably of a standard which, and there could be some debate about this, as to be on a par with the Runnymede property on the Western Shore. Now, that is a really difficult thing for some people to comprehend, but given that this is a very important landmark within the suburb of Lindisfarne, it has, by the very nature, cannot stand alone as part of the building. The gardens and the building is one package, and that package stands alone in as much as that it would adversely impact upon any development which would be outside the building envelope. And in this case, the property at 59, or the proposal for the development at 59 Karula Road, will in fact be outside the building envelope. It will be of a bulk, scale and size, and also too it will impact upon the amenity of the area. Now, we all know from the interim planning scheme the definition of amenity, and it is a far-reaching definition in as much as the amenity can impact upon adjoining properties in the way of impacting upon the lifestyle, and also too on the way of living and what people are accustomed to enjoy in the way of a garden or a building that is existing, and that will have some impact upon that particular property, in this case 71 Malana Road. The report by Graham Corney speaks for itself, and I would seek Council's support of the recommendation to refuse the matter.
I cannot support this application either, basically on two grounds. Firstly, and most importantly, the impact on the amenity of the heritage property next door,
known generally in Lindstone as the Galene House. The house and grounds form one of the most important heritage properties in Lindstone and probably in the whole city of Clarence. Unlike some other heritage places in the city, nothing has been built in front of it, around it or behind it. It stands alone, and the house and the land, as Alderman Jones said, is one significant heritage property. I fully support development, but not at all costs. Yes, the proposed 4.7 high masonry wall, effectively 4.7 high boundary fence, does abut the garden area, but the garden area is no less significant than any other part of the property. The proponents purchased a 453 metre square block with a 2.5 drainage easement and saved 20 metres, that's 50 square metres, leaving a maximum possible building area of 400 square metres. They knew this when they bought. Then they should have considered the impact of standard setbacks. This would have left a much smaller building envelope. But they or their draftsmen then decided to push the limit, and on this heritage property side, to apply to a boundary setback of 0, with a boundary fence masonry 15.5 feet high. Angela King said to me, "My husband and I are only custodians of this house, this property. I think we as a council need to also share some of the custodial obligation. I'm sorry, but I hope if this is not approved tonight, some reasonably acceptable mutual solution can be found." And I'll quote from just two parts of Graham Forney's report. The owners of 71 Malana Road have commissioned me to provide an opinion on the heritage significance of their place and on any impacts of a proposed adjacent development. My detailed opinion follows, however, I think it is important to state up front exceptional importance of the garden at 71 Malana Road. My role as Senior Heritage Advisor to Tasmania Heritage Council from its establishment until my retirement, including establishing the Tasmania Heritage Register. That work involved personally visiting more than 5,000 properties entered into Heritage Register. In conclusion, the building envelope set down in the planning scheme is there for good reason, to prevent adverse impacts on adjoining lots. In this case, the established garden on the adjoining lot, 71 Malana Road, is of exceptional significance, and all efforts should be made to protect that significance. The current proposal is not within the building envelope, and because it is not, its large boundary profile will have an unacceptably large visual impact on the exceptionally important garden of 71 Malana Road. That is to say that a house construction should not be made on 71. It should merely be, that is not to say there should not be a house on 51 Farrell Road. It merely should be redesigned to be within building envelope. As a practising architect, I know that is possible to make such a redesign. I support Alderman Jones' motion.
The crucial thing here with the property is that the veggie garden is really quite significant, and it forms a really integral part of the whole property. And what we're talking about is a visual impact of some 15 metres long, which will have substantial effect on the general amenity. And we normally, I know around this table, we talk about building envelopes, and we use discretion to go outside those building envelopes. This is a case of something could well be done, quite acceptable, but we have this propensity for people to push the boundaries all the time, regardless of the impact that it may have on adjoining properties. In this particular case, this particular property is something that needs protecting. And to say that the veggie garden is insignificant and therefore it's not going to matter is incorrect, because it really is an integral part of this whole property. This is a case, and I don't normally feel this way because I like to see development and I like to see, but I really find, not insulting, but I am sick and tired of people thinking that they can actually push the boundaries all the time for the sake of creating some modern monster that can actually change the amenity for somebody next door who has so valued their property and so kept it in mint condition, and it is something the Eastern Shore should be particularly proud of.
I have a completely separate concern in my reading of what the effect of a 12 metre long wall that's 9 feet high next to a garden of any kind, particularly an established garden with established trees. On page 95 of the report, the proposal in detail 3.1 of the site, which is the site the applicant has for the development, there is a 2.5 metre wide drainage easement located on the eastern side boundary. Within the conditions, I don't see any specific focus on drainage, but it does say in the conditions advice, particular note should be taken of the wall on the western boundary where all footings and other works must be contained within the boundary of 59 Cooloo Road. Now I'm just presuming when it gets back down to page 94, down in section 2.3, section E60, E7.0 stormwater management, that stormwater management would come under other works in that advice, which must be obtained. So I'm putting a note out to the staff that that's my desperate concern, because I know what stormwater does and I've seen what storms will do, and a wall that size could be very devastating to a garden that's next to it. The other point is I support the recommendation put forward for refusal, and I would remind Council that some years ago we did look at heritage listed housing, a heritage overlay for Lindisfarne, and I think that this situation is indicative of what we need to have in place to be able to provide future protection for these sorts of houses. So I will foreshadow recalling the work that we did for review.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We can see that this really comes down to the performance criterion around visual impacts caused by the apparent scale, bulk, and proportions of the dwelling. Very unfortunate that at this stage it's a performance criterion that is very much open to interpretation, can be quite subjective, and as far as I'm aware, I might put this to you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Lovell, through you, Mr. Mayor, the question of whether we actually have any interpretation so far from the Tasmanian Planning Commission as to how this performance criterion is to be applied. Because as I understand, so far I don't believe the Commission has actually made judgment on any cases that involve this performance criterion. Is that correct?
Got any guidance from the tribunal? So I think one of the questions that it comes down to, because we sort of have two stages of questions here, where the representative, Ms. King and Mr. Comey, who prepared the heritage report, are basically arguing that the criterion should be interpreted in terms of impacts on heritage values of the property. And my understanding is, from the officer's recommendation, is that heritage values are dealt with under the Heritage Code, therefore they cannot apply to this particular performance criterion. I just wanted to also ask, through you, Mr. Mayor, and Mr. Lovell, whether there's any guidance given anywhere in the scheme or interpretations of it as to whether the heritage should or should not be considered when it comes to this
performance criterion, or is it simply the fact that there is a part of the scheme that deals with heritage, and therefore the argument that's in the officer's recommendation is that it shouldn't apply because of that? Yeah, look, it's something that I've been grappling with, that I find very difficult to make a decision on. But I've actually leaned towards saying that I prefer the officer's advice, that I believe that therefore the property, or the property to be developed in terms of the visual impacts criterion should be considered, when it comes to those impacts, it should be considered that the surrounding properties are basically, any other property that the heritage values aren't of determining weight. As much as I have read Mr. Comey's report, and I do understand the arguments that he's trying to make, but I actually.
I accept for quite a few of us this is a difficult one to make a decision on. And one of the things when you're a planning office, when you're sitting as a planning authority, is that you don't get to make visceral decisions as a planning authority, much as sometimes you might wish to. There are a variety of factors to consider here, and you can't say I've traded property very recently, so just to refresh my memory, if you could, Mr. Lovell, basic conveyancing during a property sale, you would expect easements to be displayed or identified. So, in other words, usually if you're taking into the transaction of willing buyer and willing seller, the actual envelope that was your ability to build on was priced into the sale. In the same way that there's only so much building you can do in a rural residential zone, so high you can go in a residential zone. That is something that will be priced into the factor of the land. I really do want to note the quality and the calibre of the representations we've received on this. I've seen a few good ones come before this council, but I think this has taken things to a whole new level and shows a really judicious and diligent approach. I don't believe the representation is a case of, and it's a clumsy term, but it's not an outright, not in my backyard concept, in as much as there was another development very close by, and I think on the other bit of the adjoining block that wasn't objected to. So there's some of the things that come into the background of thought. Flip side would be to say the proposal is indeed a quality dwelling, and were it not cited where it was, I think this would be a fairly straightforward decision tonight. Largely this is going to rest on performance criteria 10.4.2, and as I think that the questioning has showed tonight, this is an evolving or not necessarily totally established concept around visual bulk under this interim scheme. So part of a rejection, or if this motion, this alternate motion or this motion for refusal is rejected tonight, it might not ultimately end up holding it at another level of appeal, but it would certainly likely to help form some comfort and some more definition around the concept of visual bulk. I thought that was something that was going to come out through the Rose Bay, a development in Rose Bay not that long ago, but that was withdrawn. So These are all factors to bear in mind.
Andretta?
Mayor, I would like to actually read from the report and follow on from some of the comments that Mr Lovell made. On page 102, it actually says that whilst the proposed dwelling will be located with a zero setback to 71 Malunga Road, which is subject to the Historic Heritage Code and listed on the Tasmanian Heritage Register, the code is not applicable to the property at 59 Karula Road, and therefore there is no ability under the scheme to consider heritage values, and the representation can therefore have no determining weight. That's a pretty strong statement from our planners, so I think that needs to be kept in mind. The proposed advertised plans show a smaller proposal than what is mentioned in the heritage report, in that the garage will be 6.5 metres long, the deck 6 metres long, and therefore the backdrop would have the length of 12.5 metres rather than the 15 metres. The plans also show the maximum height of the garage to be 4.7 above natural ground level, whilst the maximum height of the deck privacy screen would be 4.5 above natural ground level, and not the 5 metres as stated in the heritage report. So that's the officer's advice in relation to the heritage values. Further on page 103, in relation to the visual bulk as such, they actually say, although the building envelope protrusion will have a visual impact on the existing vegetable garden and chicken shed, the impact on the property as a whole will not be significant due to the separation of the dwelling and carport and well-established gardens from the proposal. And earlier in the report it was made clear that there would actually be a 10 metre separation between the actual house and the house that was to be built on the proposed site, 59 Karula. So the house on 71 and the house on 59 would be around about 10 metres apart, and it was noted in the report that with some of the other examples of distances between dwellings in the area, they were as little as 5 metres. As it says here also, in addition, the protrusion of the proposal outside the building envelope will not result in any loss of sunlight to the vegetable garden on the 21st of June. And that is made very clear. They are very detailed diagrams in relation to loss of sunlight. So I think that's really important for the Alderman to be aware of those components of the report. Thank you.
Alderman Pearce?
My only concern as I raised this with Mr Lovell today, I just wish the proposal for the building wasn't quite on the boundary. And I even asked Mr Lovell, could it be moved further to the drainage easement or even a fraction built over that? But he said that only occurs in very rare occasions. I like the development, I think it's a good development. I wish it wasn't right on the boundary, I'll tell you that now. I wish they'd just leave the fence at 71 there and just go back a bit. Now, if this, whichever way it goes tonight, if it goes to appeal either way, I really hope that a compromise is met and it can be moved closer to the easement, maybe a little bit taken off that place close to the easement, the proposal, and I think that would solve a lot of the problems. But look, I don't blame the applicant for building the house like it is. It's quite nice. I mean, I went there last night and I went to the vacant block and 71 because I really didn't know, like a lot of people, and I read all the reports and everything else, but really I think the officers have got it right. I mean, I've been through every performance criteria and I think it is. I think it's spot on. I think there's good conditions here. But you know what, I wish the place be moved closer to the easement is a wish. It's not, you know, it's not in the planning scheme. It cannot be done according to Mr. Lovell. So in that case, I cannot support refusal of this.
By reply, Alderman James.
Mr. Corney, and we've heard of his qualifications in relation to it, and in his conclusions, and I would like to repeat this because it's pertinent to the performance criteria of 10.4.2 P3. He says the building envelope set down in the planning scheme is there for a good reason, to prevent adverse impacts on adjoining lots. In this case, the established garden on the adjoining lot of 71 Malana is an exceptional significance, and in all efforts should be made to protect and retain that significance. And that has been basically what the theme has been throughout the debate. Does the building stand alone? It is of historic significance. It's on the Tasmanian Heritage Council's register, and an integral part of that is the actual garden. It doesn't separate. It's part of the package, and that by the very nature means that is part of the amenity of the area, and therefore it would have adverse impact upon the apparent scale and bulk of the proposed development on the amenity of the area. I seek Council's support.
Thank you, Alderman James. So the motion before the Chair is for refusal as circulated by Alderman James. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. And that concludes our business as a planning authority. Thanks, Mr. Lovell. There's nothing at customer service, asset management. Alderman Chong. Item 11.5.1 is that Council adopts the Tranmere Coastal Reserve Activity Plan with amendments. Alderman McFarlane. Seconder, Alderman Burley. Thank you. Would you like to speak to it, Alderman McFarlane?
In the context that, as usual, the planning regarding these reserve management activity plans are always very detailed, followed up by staff input and also with community consultation. So I feel happy to be able to endorse anything that comes forward under this process.
Seconder, Alderman Burley.
The summary of proposed changes to the actions and implementation plan for the Tranmere Coastal Report includes some result of feedback, and a lot of that feedback was extremely positive, and I think this is a great plan for the guidance and direction for activities undertaken by the Tranmere and Clarence Plains Land and Coast Care groups, community groups such as Howrah Rotary and Work for the Dole, and the broader Tranmere and Howrah community.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it's very encouraging that out of the 1,137 letters and feedback forms that were mailed out, we got 120 responses. So around about a 10% response, which is pretty good. And as has been said by Alderman McFarlane and Alderman Burley, it's really encouraging to see the comments in relation to the key components of the consultation and also other comments that were made additional to those key components. I do think it's a shame that we are actually lowering from medium to low the priority as far as art in the landscape. And the reasoning given for that is that there were a considerable number of people who thought that art in the landscape was a waste of money. I think it's important to note that there were actually 74 responses that said yes, we should be looking at that. There were 37 no's and 12 undecided. So I question why we would actually be lowering that priority. However, I will actually support the recommendation of the officers, because I think that by and large this has been a very successful consultation in relation to a very good plan, and it's very pleasing to see that we actually have a number of the activity plans in place now and are working through to get all of those done. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right of reply, Alderman Carr.
Just to highlight and promote, one of the recommendations coming from this report is in recommendation C for the installation of bike racks at some of the entrances to the trail in case people want to ride to the trail and then walk or run. And I think that this really supports the overall theme of what Tracks and Trails was all about in community health and wellbeing. So I'm really thrilled that this improves as time goes by, and that we know that our community enjoy the facilities we provide.
Motion before the Chair is that we adopt the Tranmere Coastal Reserve Activity Plan with some amendments there. All those in favour? Carried unanimously, thanks. And can we recall Alderman Chong, please? Thank you, Mr. Brown. Nothing under financial management. Moving on to governance. 11.7.1 is voluntary amalgamation of Sorell and Tasman Council's impact on Clarence City Council. Alderman Von Berto.
Mr Mayor, I wish to put an alternative motion, which I actually circulated by email, albeit late in the day, and also...
Can I just question, is it a alternative, or is it the same as previously added to?
Added to.
Thank you. And
it is alternative, if you want to get technical, it's an alternative one, but yes, it's an adding to.
Thank you very much. So, seconded Alderman Hume.
Thank you. As I've noted here, the addition is a Part C that Council requests the Local Government Board to extend the public consultation deadline to the same date as it's given to Council for its submission, which is the 18th of April 2018. And as I've also noted, the reasoning for the addition of this clause is that Clarence ratepayers, residents, businesses and organisations have had, up until very recently, no expectation that a local government board review into the amalgamation of Sorell and Tasman councils may have an impact on the city of Clarence. And in accordance with section 214C(2) of the Local Government Act, an extension of the closing date for public submission from what is now the closing date of the 6th of April to the 18th of April 2018 would provide a reasonable opportunity, which are the words within the Act, for public consultation. As far as I'm concerned, this is actually about procedural fairness and natural justice. In November 2017, the terms of reference in relation to the board looking at the amalgamation of Sorell and Tasman were actually made public. Then, in February this year, the consultation paper, following on from the terms of reference, was actually made public. The important thing to note that is very crucial as far as the public being able to comment on it, particularly from the Clarence City Council area, is that in the terms of reference, there was no reference made to the possibility of boundary adjustment stroke annexation of the Clarence municipality. Whereas, when it comes to the consultation paper, 3.4 of that consultation paper is headed, "What if the board finds that none of the options provide a long-term solution?" And under that, it is noted, the board considers that this would only be likely in the event that a potential boundary adjustment were to result in the inclusion of, for example, a commercial hub, a population centre, significant infrastructure and a major transport route. All of those Clarence actually has. It's important to note that my understanding is there was only one newspaper advertisement in the Mercury, only on one occasion. I am of the understanding it was also in the Australian, but in the Mercury there was only one advertisement in relation to this matter. That advertisement did not focus on 3.4, and therefore it is my belief that the residents, ratepayers, businesses and organisations within Clarence that may have had an interest, if they were aware of this, did not have that awareness. Therefore, I think it is very important that they are given extra time through till the 18th of April, as Council has been given that opportunity to actually provide input into the impact that it may have on the Clarence community as a whole and those areas and those people and organisations. That is my logic for the change to the motion. Thank you.
Sorry, seconder?
Look, I think that the way the local government board has gone about this process and this consultation is absolutely unconscionable. In that they've left open the possibility of impacts on our municipality, but without, taking the initiative to inform us. We've had to ask the questions. We've had to approach them and ask them whether, that's under consideration. Like Alderman von Berto said, it hasn't been made clear from the newspaper advertisement, and I'd also like to make the point that while obviously if Sorell and Tasman were interested in major infrastructure and transport routes and population centres, etc., I guess their eyes would be on Clarence before anywhere else. But I think it's worth noting that Sorell actually borders with two other council areas, Southern Midlands and Glamorgan Spring Bay, and I think they would also like to know that boundary adjustments could be a consideration out of this process. That they're, even though it might not be what Sorell and Tasman are necessarily interested in, that the potential is open for incursions into the territory of Southern Midlands and Glamorgan Spring Bay as well. That's something that I think they need to be alerted to. And if the local government board does take on this recommendation, extends the public consultation, or even if they don't extend the public consultation, I believe it's incumbent on them to actually inform those councils and to inform also, they have informed us because we've asked the question, but to inform our ratepayers as well that this could have wider implications than just the current boundaries of Sorell and Tasman. That's something that I think not just the councils but the people who live in those municipalities have a right to know that they could suddenly find themselves under another council without having actually been consulted or realising that that was a possible outcome of that process. So I think the way the local government board has gone about this has been sneaky, it's been underhanded, and I think they need to be a lot more transparent about the way they go about this review.
But both speakers, Alderman Bonverto and Alderman Holm, were basically very supportive of council not proceeding with a merger in relation to whether with Sorell, Tasman or Glamorgan Spring Bay. In fact, the decision of this council was, in November last year, that we would not proceed with any merger whatsoever. And now they're starting to take it out on the local government review board because of the nature that appears to be foremost in their minds, that there's going to be some annexation of Clarence as part of the process that Sorell and Tasman initiated, not Clarence, the Sorell and Tasman initiated, and that the board is really following their instructions of undertaking a merger between those two councils. And the very nature of the role of the board is in fact to look at, and it's spelt out in the scope of the review at the introduction of this paper, and that is to consider the current and future viability in relation over the period 10 and 20 years, outlook for Sorell and Tasman, further resource sharing options, and merger of Sorell and Tasman councils into one local council. And it also goes on to say that if the board believes that it's appropriate to consider the viability of those two councils, and if in fact it is proven that it's not viable for those councils to be able to proceed as one council, then it just makes sense that the review board needs to consider all options, and it's not outside their powers or responsibilities to consider some sort of viable alternative to include parts of Clarence. Now that hasn't been decided, it's within their modus operandi, so they can consider that, they can reject it. And so it's no real reason why both those aldermen are sort of waving the red flag and saying this is what's going to happen, and the basis of including in this particular motion that we would not, should any part of the municipality, that's Clarence, be annexed to the Sorell, Tasman or council merger. What an audacity on the part of those aldermen to even suggest that they should follow the sort of the process, which I believe is outside the process, to say that Clarence will not have a bar of it. We had an opportunity to be part of the local South Eastern Council. We decided not to, and now by default we're throwing our hands up in the air and saying, oh, look what's going to happen. Looks like part of Clarence will be annexed as part of this process. It hasn't been determined. I have put in my submission, I've made an indication today to the board that I will be making a written submission and I will be speaking to it. And for anybody who's been in this place during the discussions over the last 12 months knows what I feel. I believe that we ought to have a South Eastern Council, and I don't think that Sorell and Tasman can be viable in their own right unless they come in with Clarence and we become part of the Great South Eastern Council. I will not support this recommendation.
Other speakers, Alderman Cusick.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm rather confused by Alderman James's comments here. A decision not to proceed with any merger by this chamber has nothing to do with parts of Clarence being forfeited. We weren't just consulted about that.
Through the chair, please,
Sorry,
rather
we
than
weren't
making it
consulted
personal.
about forfeiting parts of Clarence. Sorell and Tasman have been separate municipalities for a long time. Amalgamation of the two should not make them less viable when they have, and if they're not viable individually, the amalgamation should obviously make the amalgamated council more viable as it is.
I support the recommendation on the grounds that naming it up for what it is, this is a backdoor takeover of South Clarence Council's assets, like they did with Cheswater. So the section 2.3, which the board put forward to us that they would be considering an alternative boundary adjustment if it included a commercial hub, a population centre, significant infrastructure and a major transport route. They would consider whether the boundary adjustment would impact on the viability of any council affected by the boundary adjustment. Does that mean they are going to pay for the infrastructure in these areas that Clarence residents have put in over a lifetime of the Clarence municipality, which is 150 years or so, and in effect undermine the community's current position where councils spent a large amount of the residential taxpayers' money, not the ratepayers, in having a consultation which again supported council's own resolution on June the 25th that council does not entertain any proposal that would result in the split up of Clarence's municipal district. Now, the board have been fully aware of their intentions from my perspective personally for a very long time, and so this is a game which has included sentiments spoken here tonight by certain aldermen who've always supported amalgamation. And in effect, when we talk about amalgamation, we have not talked about the benefits to the greater whole. And from my perspective, the reasons that these councils are unviable at times, it's only a small reason I know, is that the state government never puts in money to substantiate the development and the needs of infrastructure. And one of those examples is the amount of dirt roads that the country councils have to maintain at the expense of their ratepayers, whilst at the same time giving a free handout to all the trucks that use those roads for the benefit of industry, and the state government never puts in any of that tax they get from fuel. Why are we continuing to not inform our communities that this is going to be forced on us and we have to make the community aware of exactly what's happening and the reasons why? So I support the refusal, but in the light of public consultation...
Can we just clarify what you're supporting there, please?
The refusal.
The alternative.
The motion.
It's an added to motion.
The alternate motion.
Thank you. It's not a refusal.
It's an alternate refusal.
I was wondering whether you're speaking for or against.
Okay, thank you. No, I appreciate the clarification. But I also want to make sure that the general public are very aware of what's going on. So I want to see exact information going out to the community and exact information about the controls of the board and what they are putting forward and how that will affect us. I don't want to know about whether it's financially going to undermine us. What I believe is they are using Clarence's resources for the benefit of another council who has never put their resources into supporting their residents. It was fine for them to go and spend $2.5 million on a council chamber. I hope they're going to turn that into affordable housing, but anyway. In light of this, I feel that our community is continually being undermined by the state government, and that we as a council have to stand up for what we've done to support them in building our area.
The speakers. Take Alderman Burley.
Alderman James alluded to the fact that this council voted against an amalgamation. I would just like to clarify that I didn't vote that way. I and Alderman James were two voices that didn't vote for that. And the reason why I made my comments at the time was that I suspected once we walked away from the table, we would not have any teeth at that table at all, and that we would be taken advantage of. And what I see before us coming from that board is exactly that. It's exactly what they are proposing to do, because you're no longer part of the conversation. You've opted out. You actually initiated the whole process by being very proactive in wanting to talk about amalgamation, but based on community consultation, it was the majority of council said no. I didn't think the community consultation was that strongly in favour. It represented a positive, but it wasn't overwhelming. We had a role around this table to actually take a strong stand, but no, we thought the easy path was to say no, we're not going to amalgamate. So the crucial thing now is to actually support this motion, because it's the only way we're going to actually get some report done and some voice. Because when you look at the agreed principles with the Minister for Local Government that amalgamation must do, in the interest of ratepayers, improve the level of service for communities, preserve and maintain local representation, and ensure that the financial status of the entities is strengthened, is that only for those in the amalgamation process, or is that at the expense of an existing strong council who's not part of it? And that's the key thing. I mean, those principles have to apply to existing councils. They can't just do that at the expense of a strong council like Clarence. So it's really important to emphasise that based on this suggestion from the local government board, that our ratepayers that we are so adamantly trying to protect have not had the opportunity to have any say in what may be being proposed. And I doubt whether those ratepayers that are affected in perhaps the commercial hub of Cambridge, those around the airport area and those in Richmond would actually necessarily want to be redirected to another council because it suits those other two councils and it would make them perhaps viable. We have worked so hard to be a great council, not just in my time but all the time before, and it's time to stand up and say no, no, no. We cannot be jeopardised as a result of actually responding to our community consultation and thinking we're doing the right thing by going against an amalgamation with Tasman and Sorell. We cannot be steamrolled into this at all. And the crucial thing is that I have a horrible feeling that this is not, it's a bit of a payback. It's a bit about we may perceive you as arrogant, we may perceive you as too successful, and we will cut you down in the process, because I think we've got to stay really strong. We've got to take all our ratepayers on board with us, and the communities of Cambridge and Richmond, they need to be able to have a say, and we have to grab the power of the people in this, because we've got a little bit at stake.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As many other people have said, I'm profoundly disappointed in the local government board and the way that they've gone about this. At the end of the day, when we decided that we would not go for an amalgamation, it was because we felt, as a council, that it was not in the best interest of our ratepayers. Well, the local government board has then advertised, as it has, if you look at the advert, basically talked about the amalgamation between Sorell and Tasman, but to not mention that that might have a flow-on effect to anybody else is perhaps sneaky, perhaps underhand, certainly shows a lack of transparency that would have been very good in this kind of exercise. Since it's come to our attention and then B more widely to the people in particularly Richmond, people I speak to regularly, there is profound disquiet about this as a possibility. Both, as many have mentioned, because
they didn't know that it was even a possibility, that they could just be annexed quietly and taken away without having any say in the matter at all, but also because they actually like being in Clarence. They like what we do for them. They enjoy all the benefits that being in a city council can bring to them. I think at the end of the day, absolutely we have to support this. I don't know if extending the period for them people to make a submission by a couple of weeks will make a profound difference. We're not going to have as much information as we would like in the short time frame. I doubt that the residents in those areas will have, but at least it gives people time to look at the issues, to make some submissions and possibly to get some information in to the local government board.
Pierce.
This council decided not to proceed with amalgamation purely because we had ports redone for us, which showed that it wasn't viable for us to amalgamate with anybody. Two, we went out to public consultation, and that consultation said no. So that's the way we voted on this. And I think, as some aldermen have said, I think this is a bit of payback because we didn't want to do what the government said, and rightly so. We had reports, we had consultation, and the results were don't amalgamate. And really, I was a bit disappointed the way this was done, to say, you know, you can hive off part of Richmond, you can hive off the airport and parts of Cambridge and the industrial area. I think it's absolutely criminal. Look, I think Alderman Cusick said that if Sorell and Tasman are not viable now, and if they amalgamate, they probably still will not be viable. Why does that mean 2 areas of Clarence we've invested in heavily, and I mean heavily? You know, I remember when Richmond came in, the Deputy Mayor would remember too, we spent a lot of money in Richmond. Now we've spent it in Cambridge and we're getting the rewards, and now all of a sudden it wants to be taken off us. It wants to be taken off us. I'm a bit like Alderman Thurley. I really feel this is people power, and the people I've spoken to already have said they do not want it. And I haven't spoken to a lot, but the people that do know about this are pretty furious. I can tell you, are pretty furious. And of course, I'm going out there, Alderman James, to stir them up even more. Because I think... I'm sorry, Mayor, I'll withdraw that. But I'm going out to just remind people that what could happen. And the people I've spoken to at the moment are not happy about losing parts of a viable council in Clarence.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, excluding the 1993 amalgamation where most of Richmond came into Clarence, the only other boundary adjustment to Clarence in my lifetime, to my knowledge, occurred on our boundary with Brighton. The process was the result of an ill-defined boundary affecting a few properties. The change was facilitated by a great Brighton councillor, we'll call him Basil because that's his name, in response to some of his ratepayers' issues, and he literally did himself out of a couple of voters because he believed it was in their interest for that section to become part of Clarence, and Clarence and Brighton worked in an open, collaborative way with themselves and the ratepayers, and that adjustment occurred. If you want to go back more recent times, the 2011 Munro report recommendations included a greater Hobart merger of big councils, hiving rural areas off, including Richmond from Clarence to Sorell. And I'll come back to that shortly because boy did some at Sorell Council like that idea. Munro would have meant no need for changes in or improvements, as not only was Sorell Council to get Richmond, but it would have been one of the councils also hoovering up an increase in federal assistance grants. In 2013, after a desktop analysis overseen by council officers at both councils and select aldermen looking into the benefits of a possible merger between Sorell and Clarence, the matter came before both councils on the same night. For us it was a regular meeting, but at Sorell it was a special general meeting. They dealt with the matter before we did, and they voted against pursuing any further study. At the time, Clarence then left the matter at the table. As we entered this process in 2015, this council was the vanguard of the merger examination. Not defensive, but curious. We took an in-principle approach to working with any willing neighbouring councils willing to work with us, once we'd defined again what a neighbouring council was. In early 2015, as this process was developing, with the overwhelming majority of councillors around this table, I moved an amended motion successfully that made it plain to our residents, to neighbouring councils, that we weren't merely not interested in boundary adjustments in the case of Clarence, we were only proceeding on the basis that any boundary adjustment involving Clarence wasn't to be entertained. Primarily, this, I believe, was because our council, including the heritage townships like Richmond, the agricultural and the tourism precincts, enhance our urban areas, our economic and social base, and also vice versa, our urban areas on those places as well. As a secondary reason for doing this, the cynic in me wondered if some of the Sorell leopards had changed their Munro report spots. We flagged our position on a boundary adjustment and they were silent, didn't query, did not object, and they had ample opportunity to raise the concepts of boundary adjustments at any time through this process, and it did not occur. And in light of this, Sorell must make all of their submission to the local government board review public. And if that submission makes any comment around boundary adjustment, then I consider that their position could be perceived as being somewhat disingenuous through the process. If such an adjustment does go ahead, as we at council we might ourselves get to feel what it's like when residents, or what it feels like for residents when they have their land compulsorily acquired, which would be unpleasant, but I suspect it wouldn't be nearly as unpleasant for us as it would be as unpleasant for those current Clarence residents that are, against their will, moved into another council area and have to take on the debt burden of those councils, and under a capital value rating system, without the levelling component that we have, the universal charge, and in places like Richmond, with higher property prices, get absolutely clobbered with their rates. Now, I don't think I've got time to talk through the moral hazard of a boundary adjustment, where a council invests heavily to help facilitate commercial and industrial enterprise, only for this to be taken away. And I don't have time to go into any potential conflicts with the guiding principles that were outlined initially through the merger study process. Nor indeed do I have time to talk in detail about the levelling factor of federal assistance grants, to which Sorell and Tasman receive much more per capita than we do, and is a mechanism for a level of equality and has sustained both councils for a long time. So they're the main factors, but the other thing I haven't mentioned is the fairness around giving those residents that would be potentially affected the right to have their say. It may end up that they actually really want that. Now, if they want that and we had some sort of elector poll, I wouldn't like it. I wouldn't like it, but I could kind of accept it. What is being proposed is underhanded and unacceptable.
The terms of reference don't stand very well. So it says here, local government review board, review of South East Council's voluntary amalgamation of site options. There's nothing voluntary about this. Richmond and Cambridge, that's where they've started anyhow. And the other thing, that's compulsory amalgamation, they should say. As far as Tasman and Sorell are concerned, fine, I think that'd be a good move for them to merge. It's not an amalgamation, they haven't even got those terms right. If they get together, it's a merger. So the whole thing doesn't stand a lot of scrutiny, and a lot of aldermen have brought out a lot of excellent points about the way that they've gone about it. It's a disgrace.
Thank you. Right, a reply, Alderman Van Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I want to make it really clear, as far as the alternative motion, that I'm not casting aspersions on the local government board. I am actually just making it clear that due to what I believe is procedural fairness and natural justice, that public consultation needs to be extended so that, as Alderman Walker said, the consultation responses can actually be as detailed and comprehensive as possible. It may well be that there will be submissions that are in the positive as far as a boundary adjustment, and that actually means that some of Clarence is annexed as far as Sorell and Tasman are concerned. What my focus is on is the procedural fairness. In response to one of the aldermen who actually said that it was within the local government board's remit to be able to look at boundary adjustments, Alderman James is perfectly correct in that Section 104 to 214A of the Local Government Act actually deals with the scope of a review by any review related to the local government or doing a review. And under B, it actually says any review may take into account any one or more of the following matters: the boundaries of the municipal area and any electoral district. I have no problem with that. What I am concerned about is, as I have noted in the alternative motion, that under Section 214C2 of the Local Government Act, that there needs to be a reasonable opportunity for public consultation. And what I am saying is that with the process to date, I do not believe that is reasonable in terms of the deadline being the 6th of April. So that is my focus in relation to this alternative motion. I agree that Council should actually be requesting the General Manager to prepare us a really detailed report that identifies any impacts. It may be that there aren't any impacts or that they are limited.
So the motion before the Chair is that, as proposed by Alderman von Berto, which is an addition to the recommendation, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 12, Alderman's question time. There are no matters on notice. Question 12.4, questions without notice. Alderman James.
Questions. Firstly, Mr McDermott received a letter from Council regarding the street light installation on the corner of Hookie and Hookie Street in Ropey. In the communication to Mr McDermott, it said in part that one of the options are a reduction in the wattage of the light being reduced from 150 watts to 80 and an external shield fitted and the light lowered. My question through you to Mr Graham, in his capacity as the officer who heads up this department, when is Council going to, Mr Graham, fit an external shield to the light that has been installed now? It happened this week, as you're probably aware. When will the external shield be fitted to that light on the corner of Hookie and Hookie Place, please?
Through Mr. I understand the shroud has been sheared.
It hasn't, because I've been advised, Mr Mayor, that it hasn't been fitted.
Well,
so that will be probably on notice, would it? Do you reckon?
We'll take that on notice.
Thank you.
Clearly, we have a gap.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. My second question is, when do we expect to receive from interested parties a formal request to move ahead with the Kangaroo Bay Boulevard development?
I don't know. I haven't seen anything. General Manager.
Through Mr Mayor, I would expect that we would receive a proposal in relation to whether preferred developer status is awarded to the shortlisted party sometime in the next few weeks.
Important to note there that that'll be for a decision by council on whether or not to award preferred developer status. Yeah. Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. 1 or 2 meetings ago, I through you to Mr Graham, I queried about cars being abandoned or disposed of around the rugby area, just in that thing. I'm just wondering if there's been any update on this matter.
In a weekly briefing now. Thank you. Alderman Fairley.
Some time ago I did an alderman's request in relation to the possible redesign of the Opossum Bay jetty, and I have been privy to the fact that there have been consultants down there looking at that particular jetty, and I know my advice included the fact that Mars might be asked to include some funding for it to enable that to occur. I'm just wondering, did you commission a consultant's report to be done?
We've had consultants' advice in terms of including this for what's over 100 million.
Alderman McFarlane.
Yes, two questions. Just in relation to burnout cars in Roteby and Clarence.
Sorry, in relation to what?
Burnt out cars in Clarence.
Right, yes.
I note that they are usually the ones that hang around for a long time are sitting on housing department land. And I think we should have some sort of...
Is this a statement or a question?
It's a question.
Yes.
This way. I think we should have some agreement with them that if they can't get them taken away within 2 weeks, we have a negotiable arrangement with them. So could we have, the question is, can we have some meetings with them to discuss the fact that some of these cars are sitting there for a year? And my second question is about the special areas planning that currently is being done by the planning section. When can we have an update?
Abu, are you able to respond to the second, please?
SSPs.
Local planning.
The local planning commissions.
Yep.
We completed the last workshop.
Mr Mayor, I noticed in the copying reports that at the time they were in here that there still hasn't been resolved the issue with the audit office and the CSAL grant treatment. Is there an update on where that is where it is, and has the certificate been issued?
It must be because the CSAL was open.
Oh, I guess I suppose, do we have any idea of a time frame on that, or is it?
He expected it to be very shortly as we got and we should maintain.
questions, Mr. Mayor. The first one is we understand we received a briefing in relation to the traffic lights along Bosney Hill Road, the intersections of Elmer Street and Kangaroo Bay Drive, understanding that we were to understand from the Department of State Growth that those traffic lights would be synchronised. My recollection from that briefing was that there's going to be some upgrades required. I'm just wondering why that wasn't the case to begin with, and why we haven't basically been told by the department that they wouldn't be synchronised, or that they wouldn't have the equipment that was required to synchronise them.
Shed light on this?
I'll follow through with a briefing to the order on that item.
Thank you. Second question.
Yeah, second question, very straightforward one. What's the progress of the city deal at the moment?
The preliminary officers meeting at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. It's been deferred 2 or 3 times because of the unavailability of Commonwealth officials.
One question. We just had a housing summit due to the reported housing crisis. Do you or the General Manager know of any tracts of land identified within the City of Clarence as potentially suitable, affordable, or in fact any residential development? And if so, would we need to initiate any actions for any changes in zoning?
Through Mr Mayor, I am aware of the actual draft report from Treasury that had been undertaking a review of possible tracts of Crown land within the whole of the state. It was only released today, and it's actually in the process of circulating. You might have already got it, I asked it to be circulated.
Yeah, we have.
It does identify 3 parcels of land in Clarence, one which it's actually, I've been told 5, but 3 certainly that are highlighted, I think, from memory. I think they're all, from my perspective, really problematic, but nonetheless that's an issue we need to work through with the department. They include,
Hate to bomb for land.
It also includes a parcel of land known as 21 Gregson Street, Brisbane, which will mean absolutely nothing to you. But it is the entire Forest Hill on, down there. So,
At the back of Brisbane.
yeah. Clearly, there are some issues in relation to these properties. We certainly had some discussions with the department during the preparation of these reports and did indicate it's a level what it is, we'll need to respond to it.
Now, any time frame on the lights at Bayfield Street or Winkley Place? Any update on that?
The traffic lights at Elmer Street.
I don't have that on hand, but I'll take that with our engineers in advance.
Oh, sorry. I'll withdraw my question.
You get that. Yeah, we got that report that we got today.
Been here last meeting would have been you first. Thank you, Alderman. Moving on to item 13, closed meeting, and can I thank the members of the public who have endured so far. I'm sorry you can't remain for the last part. Sorry, was it moved? Alderman Clarence, seconded Alderman John. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you.